how do we hold the simultaneity of freedom, of equanimity, of equity, while not trying to be like the other side of the pole, whatever side that you're on. And that is irrespective of gender identity or sexual orientation.
Hello, everybody. You're listening to Chatting with Candice. I am your host, Candice Horbacz. Before we get into this week's episode, we are going to do our shout out. So I wanted to say a big thank you to Keith, to Roger, to Brandon, and to Michael. Thank you for all of those cups of coffee. All of that support goes right back into the podcast. As you will see with this episode, we have an in-person guest, which is amazing. So all of these cups of coffee go right back into the show. And if you want to support the show, like the mentioned above, you can go to chattingwithcandice.com and you can click that link that says buy me a coffee, or you can click the link that says Patreon. Both of those are great ways to support the show. You can always leave a 5-star review, and if it's been a while, you can do it multiple times. We are going to do a quick shout out for our Patreon members. So I wanted to say a big thank you to Bill, to Aiden, and to Klaus, and Keisha. Hopefully I said your name properly. Thank you so much for being Patreon members. I really couldn't do this without all of you, so thank you so much. And I guess this episode needs a little bit of a preface, because what I realized is I danced around the topic of what we get into. And I think maybe part of that is because I was a little bit nervous and I'm like, oh, I'm going to get censored, or this episode is going to get booted off of the algorithm, because it is very intimate in nature. And yeah, I noticed it after the fact. So I feel like I'm going to give you a quick little 10,000 foot view, like summary, before we jump into it, so you can know what the heck I'm talking about. And I hope to have Emily back again in person. I think we will definitely make that happen and we can get even deeper. So this episode, we're going to explore a lot of topics. One of them includes the practice of what is being coined pleasure prayer or pleasure practice. And the idea is it's using your pleasure as a manifestation tool. And you could do that through breath work and meditation and this very specific protocol that Emily has mastered and figured out. And my husband and I were lucky enough to have her share that with us in person the night before we recorded, which is incredible. And yeah, so it's the idea of when you harness your pleasure, you magnify your field and you're able to manifest on a much higher, more powerful level. And that can be as simple as giving yourself a hug. It doesn't need to be anything that is crazy, explicit or erotic. It can be, but it could also be a hug. So it's whatever your body is allowing and honoring your body as a guide, and your body is telling you where it consents for you to take it. And yeah, if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. I can't wait to hear what you think about the episode. Please help me welcome the incredible, the magical Emily Fletcher. The beginning is always like the most, right? You just gotta like get settled.
Yeah, we'll do a little activation. Or do you want to do like quick intention setting?
Sure.
Okay, cool. So just close our eyes. Big deep breath. Yeah, another big deep breath right into our hearts. Exhaling. Dropping that breath all the way down. Imagining those two beautiful golden cords going down through your root, through your feet, through the floor, connecting to the core of the earth. Inhaling up that grounded, fiery energy all the way up into your heart. Exhaling and imagine the frequency of pure, unconditional love flooding every single cell in your body. Feeling our hearts starting to get into coherence. Activating that beautiful golden ring of light around us, around all of this equipment, and setting our intention for the ears, the minds, the hearts of everyone who will receive this conversation, that it is the ideal medicine that they are ready to receive for their highest evolution. Activating that crown so that we can be antennas and funnels for the divine to flow through us effortlessly, elegantly, and with so much love. And so it is.
That was beautiful. That's the best way to start a podcast.
Best way.
Thank you so much. Hopefully the listeners are doing it too.
Yeah.
I love that you said heart coherence and getting into heart coherence. So I've done some brain training in the past, and they focus a lot on like just getting coherence within your own mind. And then they eventually, if you get into the more advanced programs, you can get into like a coherence with someone in another room. And then they get into heart coherence. And a lot of that has to do with manifestation as well. So kind of like jumping right in. I guess a lot of us are probably going throughout life without that that order, like that organization, right, within our minds and within our hearts. So I think like meditation and a lot of these practices that we're going to get into help establish that coherence. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think about it like if you ever go to a show, like a live show, or you go to a symphony and everyone's warming up, you hear all the instruments like, and it's just like discordant, weird, dissonant thing. And then the conductor goes tap, 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 tap. And usually like one of the instruments plays one note, then they all fall into not even harmony, but actually unison with that one note. And so if people don't have like a visceral feeling about coherence it's from this many different things going on. Your mind doing one thing, your heart doing another, your body doing another, past, future, fragmented. It goes from that into like everything comes into coherence, which means that they're talking to each other, they're listening to each other, and that you start to create these beautiful patterns. And one of the ways that we create coherence in the body in Ziva is that we use something called a mantra. And that word has been very, very hijacked by the wellness industry. People think that it means a slogan, or like, my mantra is, I'm a strong, angry woman. and mantra is actually a Sanskrit word that means mind vehicle. And what we're doing is that we're using the science of cymatics, or the science of sound, and that you utilize the sound. And even though you're not chanting it out loud, just like you have a mind's eye, there's also a mind's ear. So, we could all say like, sing in your mind right now, somewhere over the rainbow, and everyone can hear it, right? Mm-hmm. And so you're not hearing it out loud, but you could hear that in your mind. Well, that's how the mantras work. And they create this beautiful harmony inside. And there's some cool YouTube videos on cymatics where if you would put like a sheet of metal and then pour sand on it, and play it with a violin bow or play it at a certain frequency music, it makes these beautiful sacred geometric shapes and patterns. Well, that's what the mantra is doing inside of our bodies. And so it's creating, we're something like 70 to 90% water, right? So that's very mutable. It's very changeable. And so the thoughts that we're thinking, the way that we're breathing, these mantras, they can help to create that coherence.
I didn't know that's what a mantra did internally. And what's really interesting, I'm curious if it's the same when you're just repeating it in your mind versus when you're reading, but I don't know if you know this or not. So I was listening to an Andrew Huberman podcast who endorses Ziva. So wanted to throw that out there because he's like the daddy of science right now.
I know, he's so popular. He wrote the foreword to my book. He's also a Ziva graduate, and we did a course together called Mastering Your Brain, which is really awesome. But I'm so proud of him. Like, he's just like rocking it.
Yeah, he's on fire right now. Yeah, I love that for him. So he was saying in one of his episodes that when you're reading, you actually are creating an inaudible sound. So your vocal cords are actually working even though you're not using them. So wow. I wonder if that vibration is also kind of, I guess it has to be. It's the same if it's creating that coherence throughout your body.
Well, I would think about it like any other input, where if you're eating food, that food is going to merge with your cells, with your consciousness. It's going to impact you. Mm-hmm. Like if you eat a chia seed smoothie, it's going to have a different effect on you than eating a cheeseburger. Mm-hmm. And similarly, if you read one book, it's going to have a different effect than another book. And so it's like the consciousness of the book is merging with your consciousness, not to get too esoteric. But I had not thought about that about the larynx function, or that you're making like an inaudible sound. Mm-hmm. But I think that Jim Quick, who's another Ziva graduate and brain expert.
And a friend of me too. Yeah, I was like, oh my gosh, we're all kind of connected in this weird way.
I love Jim. But I think he teaches speed reading, and he teaches people how to read a book a week. And I think it has something to do with transcending that piece of that you're not speaking it to where it's really just sort of like going right into the brain. So that'd be an interesting thing to explore.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to check out that course. I'm like, imagine that superpower of being able to read a book a day. I
Oh,
think
is it a book a day that he
some
does?
people are doing a book a day. I think at his height, maybe that was his goal, which is insane. Like, you're just downloading so much information.
I remember my head of marketing, she took her second maternity leave, and she was like, yeah, I want to get the Jim Quick course to learn to speed read on my maternity leave. And I was like, perhaps you forgot what maternity leave is like. But you aren't going to be reading a book a day, girl. It's not like a break.
Also, like, how disconnected so many of us women are with that whole process is astounding to me, because we have this program that we have to be do all the time, to when we are doing maternity leave, we're like, well, what can I do while I'm on maternity leave? What can I learn? How can I make this the most valuable? And it's like, no, that is supposed to be internal.
Yeah.
I mean, some people don't want you to leave the bed for 2 weeks. Like, in a lot of Asian cultures, you don't leave the house for 40 days.
Yeah.
Like, it's very serious.
Yeah.
My housekeeper, she's Spanish, and I was walking around the house without socks right after, and she's like, no, you need to put socks on and a hat, and it's all about like staying warm and like protecting your chi and your energy. And she's like, you get back in bed. And I was so grateful for her, because she was part of that female tribe that I really didn't have in the postpartum, and I'm so grateful for her. But a lot of us don't have that, and we're not even being that for ourselves. Like, we're just so disconnected with what our body needs. Which is why, like, all of the work you're doing is so incredible. And I guess to touch back on the coherence and like that sand exercise, have you seen the images of the snowflakes? So they have if you charge it with like a word, it'll be a love will be a very beautiful, ornate, organized, and symmetrical, which is the key image. And then if you do something like hate or anger or like, what is it, like a low frequency word? Any of like maybe jealousy, right? Rage, those will be very disorganized. And in some of these books that we're reading to our oldest, they're like these conscious parenting bedtime books. They'll be like those themes exist in the story. So you'll see the organization. There's this one called The Hug Factory, which is one of my favorite books. I think everyone should get it.
Okay.
And it shows the symmetry of like joy and happiness and love and acceptance.
Like, it shows the molecules of the
It
water?
shows like they have this hug that looks like a cell or maybe an atom, and then all around it, it shows its quantum field around it. And when it's happy and open, it's all organized, and it's like fractaling out. And then when it's sad and it's trying to control, it calls it a sticky web, and it's disorganized and it's chaos. And I'm like, it makes me think of the snowflakes.
Wow.
So it's cool to see the evolution of this science and how it's going to the younger generation, and that they're going to hopefully be better off than we were.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to get that book for my son. That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
And it's such a tricky thing. Like, so that book's called The Hidden Messages in Water by Dr. Mori Umoto. And I quote it in my book because I think it's fascinating science that just like being around a word or having an intention or frequency could change, the molecular structure of water. And again, if we are 70 to 90% water, then like what we're putting into our body, the frequency really, really matters. It's going to affect how you feel, how you perform. And yet, as you're saying that, like, because as I'm now getting into this more like somatic work and this more like feeling your feelings. Like, I just got out of 5 days in a cave, and my only agenda was to feel my feelings. And I'm wondering how we hold the simultaneity as we teach our children, as we teach ourselves, of like, it is so important to find things that bring you joy and to take time postpartum and to, be in bliss. And how do we not then spiritually bypass and skip the mandatory steps of feeling all of it, the rage, the sadness, the fear? And I'm really open. I'm in the question right now. Like, I created a kids meditation training called Ziva Kids, and in it, I framed like the big feelings as stormies. So we've got like the mad stormy, the sad stormy, and the scared stormy. And the idea was that I wanted to give them the frame that like every storm runs out of rain, the Maya Angelou quote, and that the sun is always shining, but that they're allowed to feel those feelings. Like, if you try to make the rain stop raining, it doesn't work. But if you just like accept the rain, love the rain, feel the rain, and trust that, yes, the sun is shining on the other side. And so it's like we don't want ourselves or kids to get stuck in that stuff, but we also don't want to bypass it. Because it's like, if we bypass it, if we're constantly trying to numb our fear or pain or sadness, then we're limiting the amount of ecstasy that we could feel on the other side.
So I guess where's the balance, or is it more of like an internal knowing of what's the difference between that, like accepting that emotional state, whether it's for ourselves or for our kids, and then kind of enabling that, right? So we were kind of talking about this earlier today, where it's like, be compassionate, or like love everyone and tell the truth. And it's like, yes, you're allowed to be super sad, and maybe you go through a breakup, but at some point, like, you need to overcome it. You can't just wallow in it forever, because that's not in your best interest. And then obviously the same with the kid, and they don't have all of the tools that they need to be able to necessarily get over that hurdle without some help and shepherding.
Yeah.
So what's the difference between that accepting, processing versus enabling?
Yeah, I think that when we get stuck is actually when we don't allow ourselves to feel it fully. That actually we're trying to protect ourselves from the enormity of it or the profundity of it. So we just put on like barriers, or like we callous ourselves from it, or we put fear on top of the pain. And this is a Buddhist concept called the double arrow. And the idea is that pain is part of the human experience. People are going to die. People are going to get sick. Like, pain is unavoidable. But when we put fear on top of pain, if we're afraid to actually feel the fullness of the pain, then we create a double arrow. So the pain itself is an arrow. It hurts, but then it passes through and it's gone. But if you're afraid to feel, then you create the double arrow, and it's just like, ow, 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 ow. And the arrow, it can't go fully all the way one direction, and it can't go all the way the other, and then it just gets stuck. And so I think that's what we're talking about. Like, you've been in the breakup, you've been mourning it for a year, and you're not moving through to the other side. And it's like, well, probably because you didn't actually ever fully grieve it. You know, and so that's why I'm so excited about this new work that I'm birthing, because it's about like just leaning all the way in, feeling it out loud. And what I found is that usually if you just cry, it's like a 3 to 5 minute exercise, and then you feel better. And actually neurochemically, that you release toxins out of your eyeballs when you cry, and then right behind that is bliss chemistry. And so
You get oxytocin, right, when you cry?
I think yes, oxytocin, which is a love hormone, right after the toxins release from the tears. But if we're just like, I'm fine, he broke up with me and I lost my job, but I'm fine, and you never actually have the release, then we end up numbing and like deadening our ability to feel. Versus if we just start playing all 88 keys of the human emotional spectrum, then it's like, oh, I can go to the depths, and I know I'm not going to stay there, and I can enjoy the heights, and I know I'm not going to stay there either, but I'm enjoying like the full range. And as of late, I like to think about like playing all 88 keys is a perhaps coveted human experience. That like not all animals or plants or other sentient beings, or, you know, aliens, if you're on the alien tip, like they don't have the capacity to feel all of it in an hour or a day. And so rather than trying to protect ourselves, what if we just lean in?
That was one of the more like challenging and intimate exercises that we did yesterday, which was the emotional alchemy. And as we did it, I felt more comfortable, and it felt more natural. But the very beginning, I was like, oh man, like how do I do this? We had just met. You went first. Thank God. So I had an example. But even when you were like going through your process, I was like, well, what do I do? Like, am I supposed to like help, or like, and that's the I guess reflex that a lot of us have, which is to like, it's okay, you don't have to do this, which you're like, no, let her process it. And then you say like the good purge, which is amazing. So do you want to kind of tell the listeners what is emotional alchemy? And then I have some follow-ups to that.
Yeah. So first, I just want to celebrate you, because like it was such brave work. You're right. I just met this stranger person walk into your house, and next thing I know, I'm asking you to just like purge your deepest, darkest rage and shame and guilt and sadness. But if you treat it almost like an acting exercise, or that you're a little kid playing pretend, or, you know, we both have toddlers, so it's just like you see a toddler, and it's like if you give them their orange juice in the wrong shaped glass, it's like World War III. And it's like full meltdown, and then they just cry and scream and rage for like 2 to 3 minutes, and then it's done, and they're just back to playing. And it's like, instead of us trying to train them out of that, I'm very into us, you know, apprenticing our children and like learning how to remember how to feel that fully, and excuse yourself and go to the bathroom and cry, versus like repressing it and having to cut it out as cancer 10 years later. So the emotional alchemy process I do as part of I mean, you can use it at any time. Like, I actually think we should be doing like 3-song dance parties every day and just tapping in all the way to anything that's been repressed, anything stuck, anything that wants to be witnessed. Usually for a lot of us, that's some anger or frustration, oftentimes grief or sadness. And then we start to move it through the body. We start to actually feel it through like somatic experiencing, somatic expression, like dance or punching or sounding. And then usually if we just witness it, if we just see it and feel it in its entirety, then it transmutes. Like the feelings, just like all of us, want to be seen and witnessed. And if we ignore them, they get louder. And if we feel them with the agenda to transmute them, they're on to us. They're like, no, don't try to change me. It's like you start dating someone and then you're like, oh, could you start making a little bit more money and fix your nails and maybe let's get you new clothes? And could you start? It's like, no, don't date me. Date somebody else. Don't try and change me. But if we just witness the feelings in their entirety, then they're like, cool. It's like then they're willing to sit in the backseat of the car and take their hands off the steering wheel of your life. But emotional alchemy, what we did yesterday is like, I would invite you to just purge anything and everything that wants to come up out loud. And just to be witnessed in that is quite unusual, right? Because we're all trying to convince everyone that we're all fine all the time. But actually to just hold space and not try to fix it or coach it, but just love the person as they're in their intensity. And then we moved it with some sound, with some dance. And then it's fun to like alchemize it if you're ready. If it's ready, alchemize it with some bliss. And just even music itself is its own medicine. So it's fun to use that as like a preparatory exercise to move into other things like pleasure prayer, which is one of the things we did yesterday.
Yeah, it almost is disappointing in myself how unnatural it felt to be so playful, right? Because we use our kids as that green light kind of. Like it's okay and acceptable in this context to be playful because I'm playing with my child. But if I'm being silly with adults, then that's kind of weird. And like, rocking around like a monkey or like, all these like very exaggerated things that we're doing. But then you're like, no, this is fun. Like I'm allowed to be light and playful and I don't have to take everything so seriously. But it made me realize how seriously I take myself, and I never would have kind of labeled myself as one of those people.
Well, I mean, heard, and like you were 5 minutes in to your very first time ever doing it with a total stranger, and you did an amazing job. Like you really played full out and you committed. If you did it a second time, it might be, 50% easier. If you did a third time, it might be another 50% easier. So it's like we do it for the sake of doing it, not to be good at it.
So with purging, is there a reason that we do it out loud in front of each other and kind of challenge ourselves to be uncomfortable in that process versus is energy all the same? And can you kind of just do that energy work on yourself and remove it? Or does that take a certain level of experience that most people just don't have?
I think that there's power in being witnessed, just like that's why therapy is a thing. It's why we relate to other humans. Like we are communal beings by nature. So there is power in that. And I think because it's so antithetical to the way that we've been socialized and conditioned to just like, shh, don't cry, have a bottle, shh, don't cry, have a toy, shh, don't cry, have an iPad, have some pills, have some Facebook, have some booze, have some anything but feel. Right. And that's what most of us have grown up in. And even in some cultures, much more so than other cultures. And so to be witnessed and to be given permission to actually just like let it rip, to just be seen, even if none of it's true, to be seen and witnessed in that there is power. Because I really believe that trauma witnessed in community can be transmuted. Right? Like trauma plus vulnerability plus safety can equal trauma healing. Vulnerability plus fear can equal re-traumatization. And I'm just going to say it again because it's I think a really simple but powerful concept. That like if you have trauma and you're looking to heal it, if you make yourself vulnerable from a place of safety, meaning you personally feel resourced, you feel safe in the community, that can lead to healing. If you're trying to transmute trauma and you make yourself vulnerable, but you do not feel safe, that can lead to re-traumatization. And so it's really important that if you're going to do this work of a therapist or any sort of somatic processing or even pleasure work, that you're doing it from a place of, I feel resourced, I feel safe, because inevitably like old traumas are going to come up and because they want to be healed. But if that's done in a place of safety, it can really transmute. So I think it's helpful to do it in community, but not necessary. So you could absolutely just move this stuff on your own and just put on like however you're feeling that day. If it's sad, jealous, raging, you just put on a song that allows you to really turn up the volume on that. And then see like, how am I feeling now? Another song. And then usually you're like a hollow bone at that point. There's like an empty vessel that is created, and nature does not like a vacuum. So then we get to choose what we put into the vessel. So then you could put on your favorite song or your silliest song or your sexiest song and move through that.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes a lot of sense. So when I do a lot of work, and this even happened last night, although I like the dream's not coming to me, is I tend to get the most realistic and trippy dreams after I do any kind of like trauma work or forgiveness work, or even yesterday, because we incorporated some of that purging, and then we did like the bliss and like pleasure prayer. It's almost like an extraction that will happen in a dream. And one of my craziest ones, which is why I found it so interesting that you used snakes in your visualization and in the practice. I don't know what work I was doing at the time, but the dream was I woke up and there was a snake coming out of me, and I grabbed it and had to yank it out. But it was so...
This was last night?
No. This was no. This was in the past, which is why when we were doing it, I was like, okay, I'm just gonna do it, because I immediately kind of had like a little resistance to that because of that. But I like yanked it out, and it was so real that I looked in the bed because I felt every part. Like I felt the scales and the coldness, and I felt it like wiggling, and it was so gross in my dream. I was like, there is a snake in my bed, and I just pulled it out of me, and I don't know how it got there. And I talked to my shaman about it, and he's like, oh, you just like did your own extraction of sorts, and like you don't really need to know what it means. You just have to trust your subconscious got rid of something. Mm-hmm. So when we were doing that and we were visualizing the snakes kind of going up through our chakras, I was like, oh boy, okay, we're gonna do this. We're gonna see what happens.
And how was it for you? Like, did it feel? It felt
great. No.
You enjoyed it?
No, I enjoyed it. It felt like, it just felt like very sensual, and it felt, I guess like this is maybe gonna sound like TMI, but I guess we're going there anyways. Like it's like that very full feeling of when you get penetrated. Mm-hmm. Like it's a very pleasurable experience. Mm-hmm. So like that was kind of how I incorporated it. Was like that full penetration, like that like the very enjoyable feeling of penetration. So it wasn't traumatizing or weird, but I was like, this is interesting that she is telling me snakes. Yeah. That was the first thing I thought.
And do you have any idea if it was an extraction, like what was being extracted before? And how long ago was that?
This was, oh boy, maybe 3 years ago, 3 to 5 years ago. I'm trying to remember if it was like before or after my oldest. But I was doing a lot of work in, I think I had my son. So I think it was probably about 2 years ago. So I had went back to this brainwave training in Sedona, and they had like a female shaman that was kind of leading the practice. And I think that their opinion on sexuality is not in exact alignment with me, but it's definitely more progressive than some. I don't think she was very supportive of my previous work. I think that she thinks that there was like a lot of energy exchange that maybe I wasn't conscious of or consenting to, which is probably true, and that there was maybe some ties there that I needed to kind of cut and pull. And so I think there was a lot to that, and I think that even just those seeds kind of getting planted helped with that work.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I remember I said something yesterday that I was like, oh, I want to check in with Candice about that, where I was like, anytime you're in an orgasmic state, like all of your chakras open and you're doing energy exchange with that person. And I was just like, oh, like I don't know how often you were in a full orgasmic state, or like do you feel like you did exchange energy with people that you don't necessarily want their imprint in your nervous system anymore?
Well, I guess the question is no matter what, is the act of penetration creating an exchange regardless?
Well, I don't feel qualified to answer that question. I would assume to some degree yes, because it's like someone's body inside of your vessel. But the thing that that I feel more qualified to speak on would be like those orgasmic states, like the brain states of orgasm and the neurochemistry that's happening. Whereas like that is my understanding is that where all of the energy centers are opening and there's an exchange that happens. So yeah, but what's your feeling of it?
I think that we have, and I think probably especially as women, we have the ability to also be on the defense. Like we're not necessarily like that damsel in distress, even energetically speaking. I think we can be very powerful and like hold our own space and protect our space, even if because that goes beyond the physical. So even though there is another physical body inside of me at that point, I think from an energetic standpoint, and I was not capable of at the time, but I think if you are meditating and you're very aware of yourself and like your own space and like your own energy, that you could technically protect it in that case. I was not there, so I know I was not doing that. So I probably was having a lot of exchange regardless. And as far as orgasmic state during it, I would say maybe like 20% of the scenes would get there. So like there definitely were people, but I typically only worked with people that I kind of vetted ahead of time. Like I liked who they were as a person. Cool. So it wasn't like this exchange of someone who was like a bad person or
like a total stranger, someone that your body was like, no.
Yeah. So I think that helps.
It's really interesting though to like create a meditation or create a guided experience for people in the industry to be like, hey, like this is a way for you to create like an energetic boundary around yourself or to sort of like actively close those energy centers so that like this is like the most intimate part of yourself so that you have that to use how you desire. Yeah, that'd be interesting.
Yeah, it makes you more intentional about the act. Yeah,
but good for you for doing the extraction and also good for you for being open to like re-examining the snakes. So the snakes are really common. Like it's you'll see them on the caduceus, which is the American Medical Association. It's like a sword with two snakes coming up it. You'll see them in a lot of iconography on the cover of like Joe Dispenza's books. And what it's representing is this like historically what would be called Kundalini energy, what I'm calling creation energy, because it's like it has this energy has the ability to create a whole nother human. It's like one of the most divine things we could do as a human is make another human. And yet every time we go into these ecstatic orgasmic states, we're not creating a human. And yet we have that level of divinity, that level of creation energy available to us. So the snakes often will represent like the rising of that energy, like from your root up to your crown. And, we did an exercise as well where you said you could feel your cerebral spinal fluid, like moving, I think you said like nitrogen.
Yeah, just like felt like liquid nitrogen just going up. Yeah. So cold and powerful.
Yeah, and so there is this fluid that goes up and down the spine and actually it encases our brain. And it's called cerebral spinal fluid. So people who do craniosacral work are actually like putting pressure on the occipital bone, which is the base of the brain, which stops the flow of the cerebral spinal fluid, which creates like very regenerative brain states. It creates a lot of healing for the body because it's almost like you're inducing like very deep rest or even like borderline death because it's like that fluid is always moving just like we're always breathing. So to pause it, it's like the brain can then run some repair. And so it's powerful stuff. And when you activate it in the right way, you can send that energy and that fluid like up to your pineal gland and you can induce gamma states of consciousness. You can induce like orgasmic states of consciousness. And so it's a fun tool to play with, but just letting people know that it's like been used for tens of thousands of years in lots of different cultures. And if you see those snakes, it's interesting that like for a lot of cultures, that was like the path to enlightenment, the path to God. But then in our mythology, in like the Christian traditions, it's like, oh, well, the snake was like the introducer of evil. Right? Like the one that like had them fall from heaven, fall from grace. And it's like, wow, it's this shame, this cultural conditioning around our own internal bliss chemistry is so outrageously deep that we likely cannot even see the forest for the trees because we're all just swimming in it.
That's what I like too about a lot of your work is it's this reclaiming of pleasure, reclaiming of bliss, and you're calling it like this creation energy, which obviously, right? Like you say it and you're like, obviously, but somehow we are saying like we're unworthy of it. We're undeserving of it. We can only have it if we're using that to create a literal baby. It's just, even with some of the more Eastern practices, which is, we were talking about last night, if you just got rid of your desires and your wants, then you would be happy. And I love what you said because I was like, I felt like I was the only one that had this perspective, which is you're not being a human. Like, why are you here as a human then if you're not going to want to enjoy all of life and what it has to offer? Yeah. So this is almost giving you permission to reclaim that and say like, you're allowed to enjoy pleasure. Like that's not off limits. No one's in
Yes.
control of it.
Yeah, it's yours actually. And
Mhm.
guess who gave it to you? Nature.
Mm-hmm.
Like God gave you this stuff. You think it's like, hey, I'm going to give you like this whole internal pharmacy of like bliss and love and joy and ecstasy. But if you use it, you're going to burn in hell.
Right.
Like what? Like, would you ever give your child a toy to play with that you didn't want them to use?
Right.
No. And yet we think that that's what God did for us. It's just like, who said and why? and like truly, like who's trying to get power from divorcing us from our own divinity?
Mm.
Like who gains from us forgetting that we can plug into the divine through our own bliss chemistry, through our own internal pharmacology.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is that people who know and practice the ability to like tap in and cultivate their own divinity are very hard to control. So like sex and sexuality has been conditioned and shamed the same way that psychedelics have,
Mm-hmm.
because like they're both pathways to the divine and both very potent and powerful medicines and need to be used with care and with guidance and with love and with respect and with honor. And so I get it. Like it's not just like have fun, do whatever. I mean, we can all do whatever, but there are consequences to that. Every choice has a consequence to it. And so it's like, how do we simultaneously honor the profundity and the power of these tools without spiraling people into shame and compartmentalization and trauma, like unnecessary trauma?
Mm-hmm. So we know that like the first couple of chakras, especially your root chakra, is associated with survival, right? And safety and security.
Mhm.
Are there certain people that maybe should you be practicing pleasure prayer or anything kind of associated with that if you don't have the foundation of safety and security, like if that's not solid?
It's an interesting question. I mean, I guess I would offer that. So just to define pleasure prayer is basically like where you're getting really clear on a vision, like something that you'd love to create. And then you're starting to build this creation energy in the body from the root, like from your, what I call the hoo-ha. I'm trying to reclaim the word hoo-ha, which I would define as both the anatomy and the energy center, and it includes all genders. So you're building that pleasure, that creation energy from your hoo-ha up into your heart and then up into your head. And then once you go into those peak states, those ecstatic or orgasmic states, it's almost like you're dedicating that energy and that pleasure to the dream, to the thing that you're looking to manifest. So that's the practice of pleasure prayer. And I would say that if you don't feel safe in your body, then it might be more challenging to practice that. But I'm not going to say that you should not, right? Because I think that orgasm is outrageously healthy. It like improves our immune system, our skin elasticity, our endocrine function, our hormone function. Like all of these things get better when we orgasm. And so I think it can be very healing. But just like we were saying earlier, it's like if you're accessing something, certainly if there's sexual trauma involved, then it can be re-traumatizing. So then the first question really becomes, how do I create safety in my body? How do I learn to feel safe in my body? And that might be a first order of business before someone can move into it. Just like with meditation, like it's rare, but I do sometimes encourage people not to start Ziva. Like if they've had very severe recent trauma, if they have never done meditation, if they've never done therapy, if they've never done any mindfulness practices, because Ziva is so potent, because it is so powerful at catharsis, because it's actually healing your body from the accumulated stress that we have in our cells, that if people are just like a bag of trauma with no tools, I'm like, I don't think you should start right now, because likely that catharsis is not going to be worth it. It's going to create more suffering. And so the same can be true with pleasure practices. So, and it's not like don't do them. It's like just start with the foundation of resourcing yourself and making sure that you know how to feel safe.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I was curious if it would maybe affect the way that you either see what you're wanting to manifest, or in like that shavasana state, if that would affect your perception of downloads or whatever like comes to mind while you're just being still.
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly all of us can only operate from our own state of consciousness.
Right,
And we all are a collection of enlightenments and traumas and our parents and our inherited stuff and our epigenetics. And, we all are a product of nature and nurture. So certainly the desires will be will be shaped by our consciousness, and then what we're able to hear and receive will be shaped by our consciousness. But just like you wouldn't tell someone not to exercise, it's just like,
Right.
well, I might not be able to lift 350 pounds at the gym, but I could lift 50, so it's like, just start where you are, and then we keep practicing, we keep getting stronger.
Yeah. Another thing I love is that you're incorporating, like, this is open to anybody. It's not just for women, which I feel like that has typically been the case. So my husband joined us in our prayer and our practice last night, and I'm just like, I look at him sometimes, and when he's like fully committing to these things, and I'm just so in love, and I'm just like, he's so open to anything, and he approaches everything without judgment, and he's like, what can I learn today? Like, what new experience can I have? And I just don't know a lot of people like that. So when I see him, I'm just like, oh, I love you so much. But I also love that you have this space open to anybody, because I think it can be massively healing for men. And what I guess, like, even like the cards that he pulled last night, which was like kind of playful, and it shows a lot of the wounds that the masculine has with the feminine. I think that's probably a common narrative for a lot of men today, and they might not, like, he was like, I don't know if this is it. And then he pulls this card and like, well, something's here, and he was exploring it, and he's like, yes, that made a lot of sense. So it can be really healing for that polarity, like that energetic polarity.
Yeah, and just to like catch people up, like, I asked him the question, I was like, do you feel like you have, wounding or trauma from the feminine? And he said, I don't know. And I was just like, what a brave, honest answer. And then we went to pull cards to like help kick off the session, and it was like, boom, okay, wounding with the feminine. Like, all right, well, there's our answer. But I've been thinking about this a lot, because I am attracted to very strong women. Like my roommate, my best friend, my women's circle, like I am surrounded by matriarchs, like these outrageously powerful, like liberated, pioneering, full-blown high priestess sex witches. And I feel very lucky that this is my inner circle. I live with Regina Thomashower, aka Mama Gina. Layla Martin is my best friend. I'm friends with Mickey and Radha Agrawal, and like all of them have like created these empires really from nothing and in pretty taboo spaces. And the deeper that we all get into our healing and the more vulnerable we get as friends, it's like we're all starting to realize like how wounded we all are from the masculine. And it's just so fucking cliche. And I'm like, I'm so angry that it's so cliche, where it's like, ugh, like really, like really, we were all abused by our fathers, and like really, we just all had to become the masculine because we didn't trust or know how to be held. And it's like simultaneously so exciting to see what we're creating, but then also like I want for my friends to have that polarity and to be able to do whatever it is that they want and to be held and to surrender. And so I feel like because so many women of like mine and possibly your generation, because like we were all doing the best that we could, and yet like men have been taught not to feel their feelings, and men had to be the breadwinners, and it was like go work all the time, and so we had like a whole generation of not that present fathers. Right? I'm speaking obviously in gross generalizations right now. But then as a result of that, like if you don't have an emotionally available, healed, integrated masculine figure, then you grow up feeling like I can't trust that. And then you think, well, I have to hold it all myself, or I'll speak for myself. I grew up feeling like I have to hold it all myself. And if I don't hold it, it will fall apart.
I'm the same way.
Yeah. And it's that sense of control, right? And then if you have any sort of trauma on top of that, it exacerbates that of like, well, let me just control everything that I can. And then you don't, and then as you start to date and you're attracting a partner, there's no room for the masculine. And so we've like created, it's like this feminist movement is like not quite it, where women are trying to be like men. We're trying to earn as much money as men, but then in so doing, becoming like them to win at a patriarchal game. Then what we've done accidentally is emasculated a whole generation of men. And now there's like no polarity left. And so the actual healthy eros, which is the magnetism of the cosmos, the magnetism of the universe, has now been stifled. And then we do turn to our sexuality, our relationships from this sort of subverted or perverted place. And so it's like, how do we hold the simultaneity of freedom, of equanimity, of equity, while not trying to be like the other side of the pole, whatever side that you're on. And that is irrespective of gender identity or sexual orientation, right? Like, because we all have that internal polarity. We all have that masculine and feminine. And so, like, I'm going to be a different person in relationship with you than I would be in relationship with my mom or with my boyfriend or with my son. Like, there are different parts of me that get turned up or down to be in balance or to be in polarity with whoever it is that I'm relating to. And so if we, from a trauma response or from conditioning, have had to sort of like fix ourselves in one state, or we don't have the ability to be adaptable or soften, then we're actually decreasing the amount of people that we can be in healthy relationships with.
Oh, that's a really interesting perspective. And I love that you highlighted the issue isn't just for women, right? That now like men, like younger men are kind of going through it too because of this overcorrection through this feminist movement of us kind of saying being a woman or this femininity is almost a weakness, and I have to try to be like a man in order to succeed at this game that's called life.
Right.
I was listening to something the other day, and this is just from like a scientific, just like biological standpoint. So if there's not a father in the house before the age of 12, so if he leaves kind of early, which is pretty typical. I think around 5 is the divorce rate for most people. The girl, like the young girl, will go through puberty a year earlier than she typically would. And we're kind of learning now that our ovarian health is linked to longevity. So if you're starting earlier, it's kind of assumed that it'll stop earlier, which affects your lifespan. And then the telomeres of boys will actually shrink such that their life expectancy is reduced by 12%.
Wow.
12% just from a dad not being in the home. So it's like, I feel regardless of, if you're a man or a woman, that you, like a lot of us are dealing with daddy wounds and like the wounds from the masculine. And the solution to that is not to become the masculine, right? It's to like honor where you're at and like your like honor the polarity and honor that we're different. And just because we're different doesn't allow for you to not respect the other person or treat the other person different, but it's to say, no, we're complementary. We're not supposed to be in competition. And I see a lot more people that are looking at it that way, like, thank God, but it's not like this like Venus versus Mars kind of dialogue. It's how can we work together to create a culture that honors the feminine, honors the masculine, is like giving women and mothers what they need during that very trying time of postpartum, and respecting that like the typical workday doesn't really work with women. And it's a lot more curated than this like one size fits all model that we've been doing.
Amen. Amen. It's time.
Like, yeah.
It's time.
Yeah. So, I guess this is a good place we can go to. That's pretty fun. So there's this concept of charging yourself up. And it sounds kind of silly. Like, how can you sexually charge yourself up? And we obviously did our prayer, like our pleasure prayer last night, and Eric was here and you were here. And all last night and all today, I'm trying to like get ready, and Eric's just following me around, and he's like cuddling on me and like smooching on me. And I was like, he hasn't been like this in over no joke, probably over a year. It's been like,
really?
Yeah.
Yay!
So like just anecdotal evidence, it had a real world effect on like my relationship and just kind of how we're interacting with each other. It's just easier and lighter all day. Yay. So I highly encourage this to be a couple's exercise.
Ooh, yeah, that keeps coming up. Like I've been doing retreats sort of as I've been in research and development, birthing all of this. And it's like 95% women who show up. Right? So I think that will change. I feel like they're obviously early adopters. But people keep asking for like couples work, couples retreats. And so that feels exciting. Also, I'll share like one thing that if you want to edit it out, you can edit it out. But I just thought it was so sweet that like afterwards, so in pleasure prayer, we were full blown like self-pleasuring each other, but it wasn't about, we weren't like watching each other. We were in our own space. It was about us and our dreams, us and our souls. But afterwards, as we were recapping, your sweet husband was like, yeah, the only thing I was distracted by is just that I think my wife is the sexiest woman on the planet. And I was just like wanting to see how she was doing and what was happening over there. And I was like, oh my God, it's so cute. They're like 13 years and 2 kids in. He's just like giddy and so amazing.
No, yeah, I was just like, oh, and at the same time, I was like, I bet you he's trying to watch right now.
Smart man.
Yeah. No, I think it's great. It can definitely kind of reignite like an ember, especially if you've been, because I feel like we take each other for granted a lot, like not like necessarily like Eric and I, but just couples that have been together for a really long time, or especially couples that get married. It's we look at it like once you get married, this thing is it. And I don't have to show up anymore. I don't have to be present. I don't have to keep flirting or dating or putting in the effort because till death do us part, baby. And it's like, well, that's not how it works anymore. Yeah, you still have to show up, and every single day is a decision to show up. So I think going out of your comfort zone, even to like, whatever extent you find yourself, but especially like what we did last night, like this just recharges everything. And it like, again, it creates that vulnerability, but in a safe container. And then you can't help but bond on like a much deeper level. Like I feel like there's always deeper you can go within a relationship, any relationship with someone, whether it's like a friendship or a romantic partnership. And we often assume that we know everything about them. Like I've been with him for 13 years. I know everything about him. Like, no, that's not fair. Like we're constantly moving, and we're this river, right? And this river is never the same. So I think you should kind of give your partner that benefit of curiosity and like looking at them with new eyes every time.
Yeah. And I think that's the power of doing the emotional alchemy work as well together. Because then you get to see like what's alive, what's underneath, what's maybe like my partner's deepest fear right now that they don't even feel like, we're working and there's kids and like there's not the time or the space to like go really into the emotions, but it doesn't have to take a long time. And then you at least have a window into the underbelly, which, that is, I would argue, even more intimate than physical acts, when you really open your heart and let someone see like the parts of us that we're embarrassed to share, the parts of us that feel that we're ashamed about, or like that just isn't encouraged by society to share. Like I think that can also often create more intimacy even than the physical act.
I was surprised at how well he did with the emotional alchemy part. Like he went before I did, which I was so surprised because I figured he would want to take his time and process it all, but he just jumped right in, and he went in. Like he was vulnerable, he was expressive, it felt very real. And when I saw that, and I saw like this big 6'2" man doing it, like wow, this could be so healing for men, because they like their narrative is you're not allowed to have feelings, like you have to be strong and that's it. Like don't you waver, because then you are not a man. And this is allowing space to say like I'm hurt, I'm pissed, I'm sad, and we don't give them that. And a lot of these, I mean, there aren't a lot of men's groups, period, and the ones that exist are usually revolved around like drinking or like an activity where you're doing, and it's not the opportunity to be vulnerable or to go deep with someone on a real level isn't really presented. It'll be like a bachelor party, and you're like, you don't want to be the wet blanket that's asking about traumas at the bachelor party. How is your marriage? Are you really happy? Like you can't do that. They're like, come on, man.
You healed your mother wound.
Right. So where can we have these spaces? So I think normalizing that men also have emotions is so beautiful, and allowing them into the space to process it. So when you see this thing, don't say it's automatically for women. I think that it can be very much utilized by men.
Yeah, I mean, the way I think about it is that the soul has no gender. And actually, like, as we evolve and as we get closer and closer to the divine, like, that which cannot be named, that which remains, the thing to which you pray, that thing certainly doesn't have a gender, and so to call it him is so absurd to me that I took this from Glennon Doyle. It's like, I will call God she until it is not absurd to, I mean, it's absurd to gender it, period. But until that's not audacious, I will keep doing it because it sort of highlights how silly it is that we've gendered it at all. But the thing is that as we move closer to the divine, it's like we become closer to the animating force that is inside of everyone and everything. Every man, woman, and child, every crystal, every rock, every car, every planet. Like that's how I would define God. The animating force inside of all that is. The collective consciousness of all that is. And if we're in sort of like traumatized or stressy states of consciousness, all we're identified with is our left brain, ego, identity. And so it's very much like, here I am, Emily Fletcher, 44-year-old woman, mother of two, meditation teacher. But when I go into meditation, when I'm doing Ziva, it's like I just am. I start to access that right brain state of consciousness with it, which is connected to everyone and everything. And that thing doesn't have a name, an age, a race, or a gender. And so this work to me like I am drawn to it really because it feels like one of the fastest pathways to the divine that I've ever found. And I've always said, I've been teaching meditation for 13 years, about 50,000 people to meditate. And I've always said, if I find anything more powerful, I will start teaching that. And I've not found a more powerful meditation technique than Ziva, but I did find a more powerful manifesting technique. And so what's interesting to me about this work is the spiritual component to it. And so I think because we've all been trained to think that it's a sin or bad or dirty or wrong, that we think like there's no, it couldn't connect you to God. You couldn't like access the divine through sexual energy. That's sinful, right? That's shameful. And it's like, no, just the opposite, actually.
I heard that, I think this is maybe a Mark Gaffney thing, but he was saying that they've studied a ton of different cultures, and the most common thing that everyone says regardless of language or culture is, oh my God. And he's like, there's something there. It's like
at the state of orgasm.
Yes. Yeah. When they're orgasming.
Yeah. It's, yes, I think that Aubrey said that on our podcast together, where he said that the most common thing that people say at the moment of orgasm is either, oh God, or their partner's name, which you could argue that at that moment is the same thing, that the partner's face is the face of God in that moment, because you're both accessing that which remains.
So if we're talking about like frequencies, how are those exactly measured? So we talked a little bit yesterday about Richard Dawkins' scale, and he will attribute, like joy, peace, love, and then you might have like jealousy, rage. He has Joe Dispenza has lust on the very bottom. First, like, how are those being measured exactly? Because we do know that everything has a frequency. I don't exactly know like the tools or the modality of saying, like the Bible is supposed to be one of like the highest rated frequencies for books. Is what I heard.
I don't know. I don't know how you rate a frequency of a book.
Yeah.
Or how those scales are determined. I mean, obviously there's like gamma states of consciousness, beta, theta. You can look at heart rate variability. You can look at just like brainwave activity. But I don't know how you would measure like the consciousness or frequency of a book. I'd be interested to know.
I know, because when I'm like, well, I want to see that tool, because I think you can do things, the same thing, two different ways and from two different places. So yes, you can have sex where it's coming from a very dense, heavy place. But you can also have sex that's coming from like a very light and like more enlightened place, like a more giving place. And
I mean, intention is everything.
Yeah.
Truly, intention is everything. How you eat your food, blessing your water, having an intention before going to church, before having sex, like before taking medicine. I mean, as psychedelics are having this massive revolution, like your intention going into a medicine ceremony can really change the experience. Your intention making love to someone or making love to yourself can really change the experience. And so that, I mean, I think we live in an intention-dependent universe. And so I love the idea of people starting to become more conscientious or conscious around their sexuality. And like, when I tell people I'm getting into sacred sexuality, and they're like, what is that? Like, what even is sacred sexuality? How could sex be sacred? And it's like, well, largely it's the intention.
Yeah, it's like using it to connect and to go into like a more spiritual divine place than just this hedonistic channel.
And I think anytime you're like, look, you could kill yourself with water. I mean, truly, like the devil's in the dose. Like you could water torture someone. You could waterboard someone. And yet it is the elixir of life. We need it to stay alive. Water is life. It's like one of the most popular sayings in like almost every indigenous culture. Water is life because we are water. And yet you could kill yourself with it. Same thing with food. Food is medicine, and you can heal yourself with food or you can kill yourself with food. And so I think that the same is true of, I mean, even meditation, right? Like you could use meditation as a way to like remove yourself from society. I'm just going to meditate all day, every day because I don't want to deal. Or it could be one of the most powerful healing consciousness expanding tools that we have. So again, like devil's in the dose, and intention can really change how modality is received.
No, your meditation practice is amazing. I've done a lot of them, and I want to say it was either day 1 or day 2 of the meditation. I was actually in this chair doing it by myself, and I've I've always struggled with meditation. And a lot of it is probably the narrative around stopping your thoughts. And I'm like, I suck at this. And your approach is very different. And you have this whole like lazy meditation thing, which I just love. And I'm like, oh, I can do that because I had this fancy chair downstairs that they said I have to sit in, and your spine has to be exactly right. And then your jaw has to be forward, and it has to be like this exact science, and your fingers are here. And that's the way that you meditate. And I'm like, this is not for me. But with this one, you're like, okay, you can like be lazy and sloppy. And at one point, I caught myself because I almost like banged my head on this table. And I was like, whoa, I think I just hit that bliss thing she was talking about.
It's cool, isn't it?
Yeah.
It feels like a nap sitting up, but without the sleep hangover. And then you're like, oh my gosh, I have all this energy. I have all this clarity on the other side. And oh, right, I didn't have to clear my mind. It's like so liberating because there's so many misconceptions about it. And I feel like a lot of people aren't meditating because they think just like you of like, I can't clear my mind. I can't meditate. Actually, on my car on the way here, my driver was like, oh, like I want to meditate. I've tried, but then I always quit because I can't stop my mind from thinking. I have ADD. And it's like, well,
it's the best for ADD.
Yeah. And also it's not about clearing the mind, right? Like this will definitely be on my tombstone. We meditate to get good at life, not to get good at meditation. And no one knows or cares how many thoughts you're having when you're sitting quietly in a chair. Everyone cares how good you are at life. So I just want to celebrate you for trying something new. Yeah.
No, thank you. And you had this diagram that really helped me like truly understand it, which was, and you used Newton's law of like every action has an opposite and equal reaction. So it was the idea is like your mantra gets quieter, then your thought starts to get louder, and then your mantra gets louder and quieter. And it's like this cycle that kind of happens, and that is part of the process. And somewhere in between that is your bliss state. And the way that you described it was that the thought is actually like a release. And I was like, wow, what a beautiful way to see that is like not like you're trying to fight against the thought, like the thought is actually a release because you are doing it correctly instead of punishing yourself for the thought.
Totally. And so so a lot of people think that, okay, meditation means clearing the mind. So if I'm having thoughts, I'm failing. But actually in Ziva, like you said, like we utilize the mantra, which again is not a slogan. It's a sound. Well, depending on what training you're doing, it's a sound, like a mind vehicle that de-excites the nervous system and creates order. And we're actually giving the body rest. It's 5 times deeper than sleep. So for a 15-minute meditation, it's like the equivalent of an hour and a half nap. But like you said, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So if you're going to de-excite the body, then it is going to re-excite. But the cool thing is that because we've given the body the deep healing rest, the body knows how to heal itself when we give it the rest that it needs. And so then it starts releasing stresses in the form of thoughts. And so once you have the intellectual understanding that those thoughts are actually an indicator that stress is leaving the body, then instead of thinking that you're failing, you're like, oh, good, I'm doing a good job. Because none of us will do anything for very long that we feel like we're failing at. And so if instead we see those thoughts as validating, and if then we continue to get better at life and our sleep gets better and our sex gets better and our immune system is stronger, then we're like, oh, I'm going to keep doing that meditation thing.
Yeah. And then I love the gratitude bit that's at the end. It's so funny. So I've been doing your course. Eric was going to, and then he just hasn't. He's been traveling a ton. The flu came into the house and it was rocking everyone. Like it got the nanny, it got both of my kids. Eric got home from a trip. It got him right away. And this was going on for 2.5 weeks, like throughout everybody. And I'm just the last person standing and I'm just kind of waiting. But I was meditating and then I was doing the gratitude practice, or as like Joe, I think it's Joe Dispenza, it's like vitamin G. And I just like kept telling myself that in my head. I'm like, vitamin G, like, what are you grateful for? So I swear I'm always the one that gets sick right after the kids. Like I just like clockwork, like 2 days after they're better, I get sick. So that's why I kept waiting. And I was like, that's the only thing that I changed. So I attribute like that immune system boost and me just like skipping that entirely to my practice.
Oh, that's so exciting. Because like my son has been sick basically since he started school. And it's so annoying. And like I get it. It's like he's got to build his immune system, but it's so annoying.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful to meditation because it really has helped me. But I used to get sick 3 to 4 times a year. And being on Broadway, that was a real occupational hazard. You're singing and dancing for a living. So if you have a cold, it's like not cute. And you have to call out from work and then you don't get paid. Like if you don't show up to the show, you don't get paid. And so it was truly a liability. And then when I started meditating, I didn't get sick for 8.5 years.
Wow.
Like not so much as a cold for 8.5 years. And that's to say nothing of like, stop going gray, insomnia got cured, sex got better, started enjoying my job again. And that's when I was like, why isn't everyone doing this?
I could use that with the grays. It's like something with, it's a lot of Asians. I don't know why. My dad was pretty much salt and pepper by the time he was 21. And then mine started showing up probably right around the same age. And I'd have these like makeup and hair, like hair and makeup artists looking and they're like, you have some grays already. It's like, it's an Asian thing. I don't know what to tell you. So maybe it'll reverse that lineage. We'll see. Which, speaking of which, we were talking about inherent shame around pleasure and sexuality. I attributed a lot of it to myself, and I was blaming myself for a lot of it when we were like getting ready to work together. And I was like, there's this thing and I don't know where it even comes from. It doesn't really feel like mine. And you brought up like epigenetics and even just like a cultural aspect from like Asian culture, which is like tall poppy syndrome, like don't be seen, like be very reserved. And I don't know, like it felt liberating that it wasn't mine. Like that reframe, like, okay, it's not something that I'm doing wrong and it's something that I can intentionally reprogram. Like I can reprogram that feeling like an imposter if I were to be happy or ecstatic or in bliss. So I just wanted to say thank you for that. And like what a good reframe that you can kind of give other people is it might not necessarily be yours. And it goes back to like, the body keeps a score. It didn't start with you. So there is some science behind epigenetics and it's not as woo as it sounds.
Yeah. So they've actually proven now that you inherit like trauma and all the great stuff as well for at least 2 generations. They're hypothesizing up to 7. But at least 2 they've proven on rats. So, it's hard to do the studies on humans, but they've done some pretty mass studies. I think in Denmark, there was a famine. And so then they studied like the children of the women who were pregnant during the famine. And then during 9/11, women who were in New York, who were in those towers, who were pregnant, they've been studying those kids. And so if women are under extreme stress during pregnancy, like obviously that there's like postcards from the outside that are getting delivered to the child. But what's interesting is that like the eggs and I'm going to probably misquote this to some degree, but if you think about like a grandmother, like the eggs of her granddaughter are already inside of her. And so it's like that is how much our decisions matter, like not just for our own happiness. Like, yes, you want to meditate for you. So selfishly, you can enjoy your life more. But if you really start to think about it as the least selfish thing that you could do for your children, for your children's children, so that they're not having to clean up your mess or your parents' mess. Because it's like if you don't heal it, then it does get passed down either through epigenetics or just like in the energetics or emotional transfer, because we're all shaped not only by nature, but also by nurture. That I would even argue that argument is irrelevant because so much of who we are gets shaped by those early experiences. And it's like, yes, you're born with one genetic blueprint, but then every nap, every bite of food, every meditation, every exercise, like that is changing then the genetic code. I was actually at a conference from the guy who's one of the like scientists at CRISPR. I'm not remembering his name right now. Oh, Riccardo Sabatini. And he gave a TED Talk where he was saying that as far as our genetic code is concerned, if you think about it like a 100-page book, it's only the last 5 pages of the book that are genetics, that are actually fixed. The first 95 pages of that book are epigenetics, which are mutable. Those are changeable. And so, yes, we're all born with a blueprint. And what we do with that blueprint matters. So I like to think about like a parable of identical twins, same genetic code, same height, same weight, same race, same gender, all of it. And yet if one is given nutritious food and sleep and nurturing and loved and taught to meditate and exercise and is like challenged and given challenging experiences. And the other one is eating crappy food and not loved and not nurtured and not exercising and not being challenged. Like their genetic expression by the time that they die and how they will like replicate, like if they then have offspring, like what would happen to that genetic code in their offspring. And so it's just it's an interesting thing to think about. And anytime someone's having the story of like, I don't have time to meditate, I don't have time for pleasure, that feels selfish, I should just keep working. It's like, this is actually the least selfish thing that you could do, not only for yourself, but for everyone around you and for future generations.
Yeah, they say that trauma will pass through a family until someone's ready to feel it. So it's like, are you ready to feel it?
Yeah, I know. I just locked myself in a cave for 5 days to feel 44 years of unfelt feelings. And woo, there was a lot that needed to come out.
Oh, I'm going to practice your emotional alchemy because that sounds really intense for me. I feel like, I don't know if I'm...
Instead of a cave, I'm just going to do a 3-song dance party.
Yeah, I'll do that instead. That sounds like more my speed.
Great.
For sure.
I support you.
I want to say thank you so much for coming on. Before we wrap up, do you want to tell the listeners where they can follow you, any projects you're working on, and how they can support you?
Yeah, so the big one is I'm launching my own podcast.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So it's called Why Isn't Everyone Doing This? Because that's the thought I had when I found meditation. I was like, God, this thing is so good. Why isn't everyone doing this? And now starting to discover sacred sexuality and using our creation energy as a manifesting tool, I'm like, why isn't everyone doing this? And so I feel excited to bring on guests and ask them that question. Like, when in your life did you have that feeling of like, ding, 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 ding? This is so good. Why isn't everyone doing it? So that launches on May 16th. And other than that, I have a free masterclass that I'd love to gift your listeners. So it's called How to Reduce Your Stress, Overcome Anxiety, and Improve Your Sleep in 15 days. And it goes deep into the neuroscience of the course that you're taking, Ziva Online, and what the Ziva technique is, which is mindfulness, meditation, and manifesting. So that people can get at zivameditation.com/podcast. And then we're all over social media, just at Ziva Meditation.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
This was amazing.
Yay.
Bye, everybody. We will see you next week. And thank you for tuning in. That's it for this week's episode of Chatting with Candice. Before you sign off, make sure you hit like, subscribe, leave that 5-star review. And if you want to support the podcast, you can go to chattingwithcandice.com. From there, you can buy me a coffee, buy Emily a coffee, or you can sign up for our Patreon where you get early access to episodes. We'll see you next week. Bye, everybody.